Good afternoon and welcome to the Flint Community Webinar, your community resource. This is our first transition to the monthly schedule. Hope that this is sitting well for you and that this time, the second Friday of every month from 12 to 1 still fits in your schedule. We're so glad that you could join us. I'm your moderator today, Heather Lynn Uphold. I'm an assistant professor at Michigan State University here in Flint. So glad to be here with you. And do we have a lineup for you? We're going to be talking about parenting and the role of genetics. We have Alex Burt, Dr. Alex Burt with us. She is the Diamond Distinguished Endowed Professor and a co-director at Michigan State University with a twin registry in the Department of Psychology. We also have, October is breast cancer awareness. So we had to invite our friends. We were excited to invite our friends from the American Cancer Society. We have Megan Landry here to talk to us about breast cancer screening, research, and resources. Megan is the Associate Director of Cancer Care Partnerships. They both are bringing some amazing information, amazing resources. I know you're going to have lots of questions and just really enjoy the conversation that we're going to have today. So keep the questions coming. We'll be monitoring the Q&A and let's jump into it. Alex, we are excited to have you here with us and excited to hear what you're going to talk about.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me try and share screen here.
Yeah.
Oh, wrong one. Shoot. All right. Let's try again. Let's try again.
We have learned this too. It's never the same. Perfect. That's awesome. All right. Have at it. Thanks, Alex.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Let me move myself off the screen because it's very distracting. Thank you so much. What I'm going to be speaking about with you today is not parenting as a risk factor or a protective factor per se, which is how we almost always think about it, but it's why do we parent the way we do? So, right, parenting is something that, it's an activity that we value, but we don't all do it the same. And so the question is sort of why, and that's a research question that I have. So I just want to begin with a few, I think, what are sort of these are like key frames for us. So one is that parenting is a natural sort of intervention point. So if you think about the words of Frederick Douglass, it's easier to build strong children than it is to repair broken men. And that's really, parenting is not the only part of that, but it is a part of that. And that's a place that we can intervene. And parents sort of know that often instinctively once they have the child. They're really aware of the enormity of the thing that overwhelms them. And so I love this quote by Rose Kennedy about when you hold your baby in your arms for the first time and you think about all the things you can say and do, it's this tremendous responsibility. And I bolded this last part is what you do with him influences not only him, but everyone he meets, and not just for a day or a month, or a year, but for time and eternity. And so like what you do with your child has these ripple effects, not just on your child, but the people who will then interact with your child. And so it's, for folks who want to make the world a better place, this is one way you do that is by parenting. So although that's a really lovely idea, but parents are just humans. And so they don't always parent the way they want to do. And they are dealing with their own stuff as well. And so you got a lot of layers in there in that parenting relationship. And of course, this is true for all relationships. But I love this quote, parenting is the hardest job of your life on the worst sleep you've ever had. And I think that's true especially when you have littles, but also true when they can be older too. So that really leads to the kind of the basic framework of what we're going to talk about today, which is, okay, so given the stakes, given that parents are just people, like how and why do we parent the way that we do? And so that's what's going to guide what we do today. So there is some really nice developmental theory on this. Belsky, this is several decades ago, argued that parenting can be best understood as a complex and dynamic repertoire of behaviors that's embedded in an ecological network. And that sort of, it involves a lot of different sort of what we call levels of analysis or layers. So one would be like the family context. You don't parent the same if you're in a distressed marriage or when you're undergoing financial stress. You know, when parents are stressed, they tend not to parent their best because, again, they are just humans. And so no one is perfect, but especially when you're under stress, right? Another context that matters is kind of the broader social context. There are ethnic differences in how people parent. There are cultural effects on parenting, and there's community characteristics that can also matter. Yet another layer of analysis is characteristics of the parent themselves. So how does who you are as a person and sort of your own characteristics, how do those influence the way that you parent? So you might imagine, for example, that a parent with an anxiety disorder is going to parent differently than someone without, right? They're going to be more anxious about their kid's safety and et cetera, right? A parent with a substance use disorder is going to parent differently than a parent without. A parent who's extroverted is going to be exposing their kids to a lot more things than a parent who's very introverted, right? So there's all these different ways in which who you are as a person shapes the parenting you provide. This is the theory. And the final one, which I think surprises people initially, but once they start thinking about it, they're like, oh yeah, that's totally true, are the characteristics of the child. So most parents are, you're doing what you think is right as a parent, but you're doing what you think is right for that specific child. So there are a couple of, there's one quote that I love, which is every parent is an environmentalist until they have their second child. Because you do all these things and you're like, oh yeah, see, I did this and the kid turned out this way. And then you have your second kid and you do the same thing and you're like, no, but wait, that was supposed to, no, wait, that you didn't do that. What happened here? And so, you know, you just realize once you have your second child, you realize sort of the limitations of what you can do as a parent, and you can't always affect the outcome you want. And so you're dealing with your child. The other thing is a little anecdote that I want to tell. A friend of mine was at a beach, has 2 kids, was at the beach. One kid is really total risk taker, just gets out there, gets in all kind of dangerous situations. Second one is really, really risk averse, never wants to hurt herself, and is very tentative and shy. And so they were at the beach, and she said to Sydney, the shy one, she said, Sydney, don't worry, the water's safe. You can go in, you'll be fine. And then not 10 seconds later, she said, Alex, the water is very dangerous. You've got to be careful, right? So in that case, my friend really felt that she was responding to the characteristics of her children. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about those child effects, because to me, that's a really interesting phenomenon. Part of it is sort of that I find it really intellectually interesting, but it's also like the challenge of studying it is actually pretty enormous. How do you know that you're looking at child effects and not parent effects? You've got a real direction of causation problem, as we would say in psychology. Is the parent causing the child's behavior, or is the parent responding to the child's behavior? That's a real question mark. That's actually really hard to suss out. And so I find that sort of methodologically interesting. Relatedly, in most families, parents are biologically related to their children. They've actually made them from their own selves. And so they are providing their child with both their child's genes and with their child's environment. And so it becomes really hard then to figure out what's part of the parent, what's part of the child, what's genes, what's the environment, like how does it all fit together? And that's what we call our third variable problem, where, you know, hard to figure out what's going on because you can't tell what causes what. And this is where twin studies come in. Twin studies are an invaluable, what we call natural experiment for researchers. And they're invaluable because all twins share the womb. So you've got those prenatal effects kind of contained in your results. They're the same age, so you've got developmental issues kind of washed away. If they grow up together, and they almost always do, they also share a lot of their environment at 100%. So they have the same parents. They usually go to the same school. They live in the same neighborhood. They go to the same church or synagogue or place of worship. The neighborhood kids for one of them are the neighborhood kids for the other one. So the helpful neighbor down the street, equidistant from both of them. The mean neighbor on the other side, equidistant from both of them, right? You've got all those different things happening at the same time. So there's a lot of sort of built-in controls, which is really helpful. But the nice thing, the especially nice thing about them is different types of twins have different degrees of genetic relatedness. And so that's what allows twins to be so useful for researchers. So I'm just going to deviate into a little bit of twinning reproduction talk. So identical twins, which I know you've all seen, they're not common, but they're not unusual either. That is a single human conception, one egg, one sperm, single human conception. That for reasons we actually do not entirely understand, very early within the first 2 weeks after conception, before implantation. So we're talking the period, the mother has not missed her period yet. So we're talking first 2 weeks. For some reason, that single zygote splits into two and forms two entirely separate people with different, depending on how early they split, they might have different amniotic sacs and placentas. For our purposes, what's interesting is that they always have, because they are from a single human conception, they have the exact same genes. They are actually clones of each other, but like natural ones, like genetically they are clones. So people, when you see those movies and they're like, oh, clones. And I'm like, yeah, we already do that. So it's not that interesting. We already do that. We know what that looks like. They're not exactly the same person, not even close. They're still separate humans. But they are also always the same sex. They have the same hair and eye color. So, that's the monozygotics. Dizygotic twins are qualitatively different. That is literally two conceptions that happened at roughly the same time. So you have two eggs and two sperm. So they are really just regular full siblings that happen to be in the womb at the same time. So they share about 50% of their segregating genes, just like all full siblings do, and they can be same sex or opposite sex. And so you can determine this through DNA tests, but you can also just use simple questionnaires. People always want to know this, so I always include this now. People are always interested, how can I tell if these twins that I know are MZ and DZ? So there's a lot of good questions. The best one is it hard for, there's a couple that I really like. Is it hard for strangers to tell them apart? Like, can they pretend to be the other person? And that's true with strangers, but it's especially true with family members. Within a family, DZ twins, fraternal twins, just basically cannot confuse their parents or their siblings. Like, they know them so well, they can look at a glance and know which kid that is, right? Whereas monozygotic twins can, under the right circumstances, they can actually pass for each other. And even parents can get confused. Anyway, those are just some questions that people often want. Okay, so what's the scientific logic here? It's actually quite simple and sort of genius in its simplicity, which is that if monozygotic or identical twins are more similar than fraternal twins, given they have, what must cause this? Well, genes. It's not the uterine environment. It's not, they all share their environment. So it's got to be genes. That's what's causing that extra similarity of these monozygotic twins. And if the monozygotic twins are not more similar than the DZ twins, then we say, oh, this must be environmental. So that's literally the entire logic of twin studies. Now we use all these fancy models to do that, but this is literally what we're testing. Okay, so first set of sort of results I want to show you are the results of a meta-analysis that I did with a former student of mine. 100% her idea. Just want to give credit where credit is due. She is now, not surprisingly, she's like the director of, actually kind of a bigwig, director of research or people research on people for the Department of Defense, like kind of a big deal. But yeah, it's just kind of a big deal. Anyway, so Ashley and I conducted this meta-analysis of 51 twin studies of parenting behavior. Now, before I jump in, there are some important caveats here, not caveats, but like there's layers to this that I want to kind of go over. Okay, so there are different kinds of twin studies. So the basic thing is, are the twins the parents or are the twins the children? Because those two designs tell us different things. So the parent-based design, and just try and ignore while I'm talking the text. That's just there as like a reference for y'all once I've explained it. So A is additive genetic influences, and that's what we call, that's just what we call it in behavior genetics, we call it A. So the A effect would be the influence of the parents' genes on the parenting they provide. So do monozygotic twins provide more similar parenting to their kids than dizygotic twins? That answers that question. The next one is what we call C, or common environment. And this is basically that these twin moms here grew up in the same house. They, again, had all those similarities, same parents, same address, same schools, same, places of worship, etc., same neighbors. And this is actually what people think. When people think about why they parent the way they do, they think, oh, well, this is because my mom did this. Or this is because my dad did this. This is when we think about the origins of our parenting behavior, we turn to C explanations, as we call them. Like, we think that this is because of XYZ that happened in our house. And that includes like cultural values, neighborhood. It includes having the same parents, household rules from childhood, etc. And then E are their unique experiences. So this could be, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff in here too. This is, one of these twin moms might be in a good romantic relationship, and the other one is in the middle of a divorce. That's going to be an E effect, right? That's a difference between the twins, regardless of whether or not they're genetically identical. One might be farther along in their career than others, or one might be have just gotten fired, and that's affecting their parenting, right? So there's all those kind of they're still living their own lives. But the other thing that is different, and actually built that into the picture, they are not parenting the same children, right? One of them is parenting this kid, and the other one is parenting this other kid. So they could be having different parenting experiences because they're also just parenting different children. So you got all of those things. So what we do in twin analyses is we run it all kind of through this twin analysis machine, if you will. And then we can determine, okay, so is it A, is it genetic, is it environmental? And if it is environmental, is it common family environment, or is it your unique environment? So with that in mind, I'm going to show you your first set of results. So here we've got two types of parenting. We actually looked at three, but I just wanted to make it simple. Warm, positive parenting, and harsh, negative parenting. And those are exactly what they sound like in terms of how they're defined. So what do you see here? First thing first, we're looking at mothers and fathers. If you look at warm parenting and harsh parenting, you see some influence of parent genes on the parenting they provide. Part of the reason you're parenting the way they do is because of your own genetically influenced characteristics. And I might add that your own genetically influenced characteristics are going to include things like your personality, which is strongly genetically influenced. Some forms of mental illness are genetically influenced. Some are much less. Depression is a little bit, but somewhat less. Whereas like schizophrenia is very highly heritable, for example. So you've got genetic influences in there. And that did not surprise us. We expected to see some genetic influences on parenting because genes have a widespread influence on behavior in general. So we expected that. What kind of shocked us, I got to be honest with you, there was no common environment. Growing up in the same household did not make them more similar in their parenting. What did make them, what we saw was a lot of unique environment. Their own lived experiences as adults, the fact that they're parenting different kids, that was where we were seeing a big effect. So our first set of conclusions then is that our own childhoods, and I'm going to do the conclusions as we go, is that our own childhoods don't actually seem to have much, if any, effect on our parenting directly. This is good news for lots of families because a lot of people grow up in circumstances that they would not want to replicate. And so I just want to say that you absolutely, the data do not suggest the data do not point to that as a causal explanatory pathway. So good news, I think. Our genes do seem to have some effect on our parenting, and that's probably via things like personality, mental illness, cognitive ability, all those things. But there's lots and lots of room for child effects. So no guarantee that these are child effects, but there sure is a lot of room for them, as much as 70%. So really interesting. Okay, now we got our second design, and this is the child-based design. And this is where the twins are the kids. And so the mom is parenting the twins. And so this actually fundamentally changes our interpretation. So the genetic influences here are not the genetic influences of the parent on their own behavior. It's the child's genetic influences on the parenting they are receiving. So if monozygotic twins receive more similar parenting than dizygotic twins, that would suggest some genetic influence on the parenting. Okay. How might that work in practice? I think an example is our best bet here. Let's just say you walk into a room and there are two toddlers in there. One of them is happily playing with his bricks and he toddles over to you, so cute with the little cheeks, and is like, look, you know, and all happy. The other kid is pitching a fit in the corner, slamming his fists on the ground and having just a total meltdown. Which child do you feel warmer to? Obviously the first one. That is, and to the extent that those kids' behaviors in those moments are genetically influenced, and they may not be, but but if they are, you are responding to their genetically influenced characteristics. So this is not something we just see in the parent-child relationship. This is in all relationships. Okay, so that's the genetic. The environmental piece would be like, what does the child's family context, how much does that influence the parenting they're receiving? So like parenting, the characteristics of the parent are what we think would be especially important here, like parent personality, parent mental illness. This is where those effects would go. And then you've got unique influences on the child's environment. And this would be like the child's peer groups, but we especially think of kids where one child has a physical illness of some kind and the other one doesn't. You don't parent those kids the same, right? And so that's where that's going to go. Okay, so what do we see with that framework in mind? Well, what we see is a very different pattern. We are seeing, yes, there's some influence of parent personality in that common environment piece, which we see across the board. And yes, there's some influence of the unique person-specific environment that we're not parenting the kids exactly the same. But what I think is the most interesting is that across the board, we're seeing indication that the kids' genes are eliciting parenting that is consistent with their genetic predispositions. Again, with that evocative process in mind, thinking about those two toddlers, we're seeing that process play out in the data as well. So if we think about our second set of conclusions, the first would be that our kids' genes do seem to be influencing the parenting we provide to them. And this is what that process we call an evocative gene environment correlation. But so does the context of our overall home also influences the parenting we're providing, probably via our stress level, access to resources, our personality. And then we're also responding to each child as an individual. So you've really got all the different layers there. So in terms of this slide on developmental theory, we wanted to look at that first round of characteristics of the parent and characteristics of the child. And we have really begun to illuminate the role. Those things are both definitely there. We're seeing them at multiple levels of analysis, right? When we do the parent studies and when we do the child studies. So we really do feel confident that these two parts of the theory are the characteristics of the parent and the characteristics of the child definitely do seem to matter. The other thing I want to look at today, and I'll try and do this quickly just for time, is aspects of the social context. And what the study I'm going to talk about, I've got others, but the one I want to talk about are kind of characteristics of the community that might influence the parenting we provide. So there is some really interesting data to sort of generally suggest. So the Moving to Opportunity, which was our housing relocation randomized control trial, found that moving to a low poverty neighborhood reduced from a high poverty neighborhood, reduced parental distress by about 20%, which is actually quite significant. Which, I mean, to talk about obvious, right? Like, yeah, right. It's going to reduce parental stress. But this is important because, as I said, implied earlier in the talk, parental distress is a robust predictor of colder and harsher parenting. When you're stressed out, you are not the parent you want to be. It's not possible to be. You're stressed. You can't. You're also not the romantic partner you want to be, or the friend you want to be, or the boss you want to be. You just can't. You're only a human, right? So that's important information for us. I'm going to tell you very quickly about some results. This was information on the sample. I'll just give you a very brief overview for time. A twin study of 1,000 families, a little more. Half of them are population-based, and half of them are what we called at risk, but they're really not at risk. They're just under-resourced families residing in disadvantaged neighborhood contexts around this. These are all families from the state of where the twins were born in the state of Michigan and still live in the state of Michigan. And these are child twins, ages 6 to 10. We got most of the mothers participated, almost all of them. The sample is somewhat diverse, not as diverse as we hoped. When our recruitment of families residing in disadvantaged neighborhood contexts absolutely included urban areas and suburban areas in Michigan, Flint included, but we also have a lot of rural, poverty in Michigan. And so those families were recruited as well. And so just given the demographics of Michigan, the sample was a little wider than we were hoping it would be, but anyway, it does actually, if we compare it to the census data for those areas, it did actually track for us. So we felt okay about it, even though it wasn't what we were hoping. Couple of measures to look at the neighborhood context. Again, I'll do this incredibly briefly. Child Opportunity Index combines 29 census tract indicators and gives you these nationally normed Z-scores. And this is about that administrative census tract data. But administrative data is like, okay, and it's cool in its way, but I really like doing mailings to the neighbors and finding out, like, people who live there, what is it like for you? And so we mailed to 10 randomly chosen addresses in each under-resourced family census tract, and we invited one adult per household to complete a survey. We got our response rate was ridiculous, frankly, and 70% of people of households responded, of which 70% participated. I was expecting something closer to 30%, and so this completely destroyed my grants budget. But anyway, good problem to have. We ended up with about 2,000, a little less than 2,000 neighbors, a little older, but anyway. What we examined was 5-kilometer buffers, and if you looked within a 5-kilometer buffer around the family, we had about 13 neighbors on average per family, but ranging up to 47, and we had at least one for all families. And what we got a bunch of different indices, but what I'm looking at here is extent of neighborhood problems like crime and blight, and we just reverse scored it. Okay, and positive parenting, we also did 2 things. We looked at a parental environment, a questionnaire, and then I'm just really into measurement. And so we also did videotaped parent-child interactions of every single parent-child dyad. So it was like 4,000 dyads. And so then we coded them all, and it was, anyway. So it was kind of a thing. So I didn't need to say that it was 4,000, but like, I need to highlight because it's a lot. And we coded the amount of maternal use of explanation and praise. So we were focusing here on positive parenting. So what did we find? A lot of different things, but what I want to focus on here is when we looked at a bunch of different ways of doing the data, and our median p-value across all the ways was quite good. Almost all of the p-values were significant. As you can see, this is a process called specification curve analysis. It's just a different way of doing analyses that gives you additional indicators. And our median effect sizes were small but robustly significant. So what we saw was that the neighborhood we live in did seem to shape parenting to some extent, not in a huge way, but it was definitely there. And what we were seeing was that in neighborhoods with slightly less opportunity, we saw a little bit less positive parenting. And that is, again, to be expected given as I've described. Not that there was none, just that there was a little bit less. And again, the effect is small, but it is there. This could reflect, so why does the neighborhood matter though? So is this about just stress in the neighborhood? Yeah, sure, it could be. It could also reflect the fact that neighbors talk to each other about their kids. There is this, like, it takes a village to raise a child thing. The parents, in some neighborhoods, there may be more community involvement in the child's upbringing. And so the neighborhood might really matter because the neighborhood is sort of directly shaping the parents' behavior in some ways. So not totally clear, but really interesting suggestions there, really interesting ideas, which is, okay, so that was what I just said. Okay, final thing, and then I'm gonna stop. Could it be that these child effects that I identified in the first study and the neighborhood effects that I identified in the second one, how do those work together? Like, could it be that the child effects and the neighborhood interact? So that child effects matter more in some contexts than in others. So this would be kind of an interaction approach. Like, could it be? Maybe. Let's take a look. So the long and the short of it is, yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely what we saw when we look. What we see is that in lower opportunity neighborhoods, we saw more evidence of child effects than we did in the higher opportunity neighborhoods. Okay, so how do we interpret that? Like, what does that mean? Well, I think it's pretty amazing, actually. So what we're seeing is that mothers in neighborhoods with less opportunity were actually more responsive to their children's characteristics than mothers in wealthier areas. The alternate way of understanding that is that mothers in wealthier areas, there's so much social pressure to be warm with your kids that you're not differentiating and you're not responding to your child in the moment. So and we don't know which of those explanations is, we don't know exactly how to handle, we don't know if it's that there's a lot of social pressure in the one and in the other. But I really think this finding is interesting because I think it pushes against common stereotypes. I think mothers in under-resourced neighborhoods are, in fact, more responsive to their child's characteristics. And I just think that's a really, the idea that there's a lot of negative stereotypes, and I just feel like this helps push it back against that. But I also think it's very interesting from the idea of like how we understand the origins of parenting behavior. That there's this like blanket theory as though it applies to everyone, but that's not what it looks like. It looks like parenting has different origins in different contexts. So if we're going to study this, we need to do so in context specific ways. So in close, parents are just humans. They are doing a very hard job under sometimes very stressful circumstances. And I think but it is not just, there's a lot more going on in their parenting than just them. Sometimes they are responding to their child. Other times they're causing things in their child, but it's a much more dynamic, fluid relation. And it is a relationship. It is not a one-way parent to child street. It is a relationship. So if you are feeling very frustrated with one child versus another, maybe, yeah, fine, look at yourself, of course, but also think about, what am I responding to in this kid versus that kid? And can I figure that out and get help around that? Like, can I get more support? Does this kid need therapy? Whatever, right? Like if you're feeling really frustrated with one child, that's information maybe about you, but it also really be information about your child. So I just feel like, we get the messages, especially from mothers, but even for fathers, that it's 100% your fault and you have to be perfect. And that's just not realistic. So I like to push back on that whenever I can. All right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, that's all I have. Good grief. The freedom, right? And just the opportunity to take a breath, right? From from this responsibility. I actually wonder, can you share your slides again, even if
Oh,
you
yeah, sure.
share the other, regardless of which one, the one that I was hoping you could just walk us through a couple of examples on your last.
Sure.
Oh, yes, perfect. So the slide before this, take us back to that example of, the two kids, the one toddler coming up with a block, and then the other one who's kind of, throwing a fit and having some, yes, this one.
This one.
Yeah, with this one or the next one with the conclusions. The fourth set of conclusions.
This one?
Nope, the fourth set of conclusions, but
no, and I'm in the totally wrong direction. So sorry.
That's all right.
This one.
So yeah, so here, in these neighborhoods where there are less opportunity for the mother. So this, when we think about social determinants of health, when we think about those layers of lack of access, food deserts and things like that, that's the neighborhood that you're talking about for this, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. All right.
So I think, as I say, I think part of it, there may be a cultural pressure in more resourced neighborhoods to always be warm, even when your child's behavior doesn't warrant that warmth. And that's an interesting idea, but I think people are a little more nuanced than that. What I'm more interested in the idea is that in under-resourced contexts, I suspect that what parents are having to do, they may want as a person to always be warm with their child because that's the person they love most in the world, but they have to be, they're only a person and they have to conserve resources. So like they have to focus on other things and may only be able to be engaging in these positive parenting behaviors when their child is eliciting that behavior, like when their child seeks it out, or when their child does something great, or when their child helps with something, right? So they're responding in a way, like they're engaging in positive parenting behavior, but they're doing so in response to their child, if that makes sense. Versus maybe because they're conserving resources, maybe because that's how they prefer to parent. I'm not sure. We don't know. There's a lot to dig into there. I think we've got some additional data in the sample that we might be able to sort of start to pull this apart a little bit. We can look at specific aspects of the neighborhood. So for example, we might be able to, we're doing, we've already done, we've got the informant reports and we've got the census tract data, but even within that, that's actually still relatively thin. When you're looking at census tract data, you can look way beyond just the socioeconomic indicators. You can also look at the built indicators. You can look at access to green space. Maybe it's easier for parents to provide this when there's green space, right? We know green space is good for mental health, and then that allows them to provide these positive parenting experiences for their kid. We don't know exactly what's driving it, so we're really only in the hypothesis standpoint. So it could be that the action is happening in the more resourced neighborhoods and it's a cultural issue there. It could be that it's in the under-resourced neighborhoods and it's reflecting conservation of resources, or it's reflecting something specific about the neighborhoods, like access to food, access to clean air, access to, I don't know, like water that doesn't have, poisonous water and right, like there's toxicant in aspects of the neighborhood, there's built aspects of the neighborhood, there's, is there a highway running through the neighborhood, right? We know that noise, human industrial noise negatively affects mental health, whereas birdsong improves mental health. Those are the kinds of things we are collecting those data and we can do that dive, but right now I'm like, well, it could be this, or it could be this, or it could be this. I just don't know yet.
But how exciting to be like at the tip of,
yeah, we're at the tip.
All of these other things. And someone put in the chat, the relationship to the water crisis and other, COVID and other, extreme tragic, experiences in community, right, that are still going on. So lots of big opportunities. Remind us again of our takeaways as parents, you know, whether it's toddlers, like what we talked about with Megan and where she is with her family, or others with older adults? What are things that we should remember?
I mean, to me, I think the take homes are that, you know, certainly to some extent, your parenting is in your control to an extent. Like how you parent is in part a function of, you know, your how you decide to parent, your stress level, etc. But I think what I think parents need to give themselves some grace on is that they're also responding to their child. And if they're feeling really frustrated with a child, there might well be a very good reason for that. And they should really listen to that, because especially if other people are frustrated with your child, that's like a really, I happen to be a clinical psychologist as well. That's actually like a really good indicator that your kid might benefit from some services. And so if you're feeling really frustrated with your kid, I would say get into services sooner rather than later. Don't delay until it becomes life or death, right? Get them in. The sort of, it's good, bad news. It's goodish, badish. The good news and the bad news is that when kids are in distress, they tend to behave pretty poorly at home and with their parents. So it's pretty easy for you to know, in a way, if your kid is in distress. And so I would encourage you, if you've been feeling frustrated with your kid for a while, that is like a red flag. You know, that's like a beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, boop. That's not about you being a bad mom, that might, or parent, that might be about you picking up on something that's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Huge. Alex, we want you back. We want you back with, you know, because I'm even thinking about the implications with interventions that we're doing in the community, right? And so having this information, not only to refresh parents and just give them this perspective, but also guide the interventions and the work that we're doing, right? To consider these other factors. So lots of ways that our community health workers and, you know, other folks can just further support community. So
the final thing I'll just say, and then I'm really eager to hear from Megan, is that, you know, I focused on the parent-child relationship because it's such an important one with all these like big ramifications. But the truth is that my suspicion would be that a lot of this applies to other relationships as well, right? In a given relationship, part of it is what you're bringing to the table, but you're also responding to what you're being given. So any relationship is a two-way street. Yeah. So you're bringing your own characteristics and your genetically influenced characteristics and your environmentally influenced characteristics, but so is the other person. Yeah. So I would just say that I think this is, I think our genes are woven throughout our life, and so are our environments. So anyway, that's all I have to say. Thanks. Can't wait to hear what you think.
The more questions I have and the more I want to find out.
I know. I'm like, wait, don't stop, please.
It's like, I do have this 2-year-old at home.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are going to transition to hear from Megan Landry with the American Cancer Society. She's got some wonderful information to share with us. We'll turn it over to you, Megan.
Yeah. Well, first of all, again, that was really fascinating. I really loved hearing I could probably listen to you talk all day. So thank you for sharing your research and information. I'm going to get in touch with you about presenting to we have a working parent group at the American Cancer Society. So we might want you to come. So we'll totally shift gears. I am here to talk a little bit about breast cancer, but not necessarily breast cancer itself. I will share some statistics and some information on screening, but really resources available to people who are fighting breast cancer, or if you know someone fighting breast cancer. I am not a medical professional. My title is Associate Director of Cancer Center Partnerships. So I get the very fun job of, that's not sarcastic, I really do love my job. I get to work with the cancer centers in Michigan and Indiana on how to increase screening rates, how to prevent cancer, how to support patients that are going through it and their caregivers as well. So you can go ahead to the next slide. So we're just going to talk a little bit about what the American Cancer Society does in the space of breast cancer, some statistics, and then our programs and services. Next slide. So I want to share a little bit about American Cancer Society and where we are in the fight to end breast cancer. So we've invested $78 million in breast cancer research. We currently have 160 breast cancer grants. that are active right now. We have 2.9 thousand Reach to Recovery members, and we'll talk about what Reach to Recovery is towards the end, and provided 323,000 rides to treatment. We also have a 24/7 helpline. Again, we will talk about that, that we have helped 300,000 people. And these are all numbers from 2022, just that year alone. Next slide. So when people think of American Cancer Society, I hope that they think of research, because I'm really proud of the research that we do. We've been a part of major breast cancer breakthroughs. We were the first to demonstrate that mammograms are safe and effective for early detection. Our funded research led to the use of tamoxifen and also Herceptin, which are two of the most common treatments for breast cancer. And that was all funded through American Cancer Society. Next slide. We are tirelessly working to continue to break new ground, to find better treatments. So these are just some examples of what we're currently doing in our research. We're understanding metastasis, which is, if breast cancer spreads to another organ. We are reducing disparities. There is a large disparity between mortality rates with Black women and white women in breast cancer. And then, of course, finding new ways to respond to treatment. Next slide. So just some numbers. Breast cancer is the most commonly diagnosed cancer. It has surpassed lung cancer. Approximately 297,790 women. And we can't forget that men can get breast cancer also. So 2,800 men will be diagnosed with breast cancer just this year alone. A huge impact and important note for American Cancer Society is to reduce the disparity. Black women are 41% more likely to die of breast cancer than white women. Triple negative breast cancers have a poorer prognosis, and those cancers are occurring at twice the rate in Black women. And breast cancer is the most commonly diagnosed and leading cause of death among Hispanic and Latino women. So again, this is something that we are actively looking at, researching. How can we support women? How can we get women in for screening, for early detection, and better treatment? Next slide. I cannot talk about breast cancer without going over our screening guidelines, which I know there's been a lot of confusion around breast cancer screening guidelines because different organizations say different things. The good news is that most organizations are pretty much on the same page right now. So ages 40 to 44, we recommend women have the option to start screening, talk to your doctor, see if it's the best fit for you. If you have, and I want to point out that this is for women at an average risk. So there are women who are at a higher risk, and that could be if you've had a family member with breast cancer. It could be your race. Black women are at a higher risk, so they may be able to start earlier. If you have dense breasts, you can start earlier. So this is average risk. You should always talk to your primary care doctor or your OB/GYN about what is best for you. We definitely recommend ages 45 to 54 get screened every year, and then 55 and over get screened every other year. So if you're overdue, let this be your reminder to get in for your screening and to tell the women in your life to go get their screening. Next slide. So I wanted to share just a little bit. This is new. It's our National Breast Cancer Roundtable. You can just skip to the next slide. What our National Breast Cancer Roundtable is a national coalition made up of several organizations. Other nonprofits are part of this. Other breast cancer support groups are part of this. Health systems are part of this. And they come together as a national cohort to look at different areas, such as screening, access to treatment, clinical trials, and breast cancer support services. This all came about because of President Biden and his moonshot, his cancer moonshot. Cancer is very important to the Biden administration. And so Dr. Jill Biden actually helped us kick this off and get this started. Next slide. You can just skip right ahead to the next slide. So I wanted to make sure that we went into resources, and there are a lot. So I'm actually didn't even include absolutely everything. I included a quick snapshot of some of the flyers or brochures that we have available, and anybody can download them. There's a link, maybe we'll send out the slides after. There's a link that you can click and register and then have access to these materials. I specifically called out the breast density in your mammogram report because this is something that's becoming more common. Dense breast means you're at a higher risk for breast cancer, and a lot of women have dense breasts. So that flyer tells you what it is, how do I know if I have it, and basically what to do if you do have dense breasts. Next slide. We have a specific facts and figures. So American Cancer Society develops statistics every year, and we have a specific facts and figures for breast cancer, if that's something that you find interesting. And then some of our other flyers are just really about getting out there and getting screened. So if you're going out in the community and need flyers to provide to the women in your community, whether it's your church or a community center, you can use those flyers to talk to women about getting screened. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the programs and services that the American Cancer Society has available for both patients and caregivers. Next slide. I mentioned our 24/7 number. This is one of the things I am most proud of about the American Cancer Society. It is, again, 24/7, 365. So on Christmas morning, if somebody is in distress because they have a question about their cancer, they can call the American Cancer Society and a live person will answer that phone. We can provide information, resources. We have health insurance specialists. During COVID, we added an option on our website for video chat for people who might have needed like that one-on-one support that they weren't getting. Next slide. We have a lot of online support because that is the way of the world now, right? Is online. So we have a cancer survivors network where cancer patients, the American Cancer Society defines survivor as the day you're diagnosed. So cancer patients, people who are post-treatment can go on there and talk to other patients or other folks that are post-treatment. We have cancer support websites, we have survivorship guidelines, a very interactive caregiver resource guide and caregiver videos, and then a bookstore where we have cookbooks, we have books on how to talk to kids about cancer, lots of other stuff on that bookstore. Next slide. This is new. Our ACS Cares program just launched in September. So it's an app, and what I really, really love about it is it's specifically tailored to the person who puts their information in. So you can go in, put when you were diagnosed, what your diagnosis is, your age, where you live, and it will populate information specific to you based on the details that you just gave it. Something we're piloting is having volunteers. So if a breast cancer patient signs up and indicates that they would like to talk to somebody who's had breast cancer, we're going to be able to match them and have them chat via the app. Next slide. Reach to Recovery is almost exactly that. Reach to Recovery is a program that we've had at ACS for a very long time. It is where just that breast cancer patients can talk to people who have been through breast cancer themselves. You're matched based on your diagnosis, your treatment plan. We try to match it based on personality as well. This has been really successful, and we hear amazing feedback about people being able to have that sort of mentorship trained support. Next slide. We also have a booklet called TLC, where women who are undergoing treatment can order wigs, they can order bras for mastectomy patients, all kinds of things. So tlcdirect.org is the website where women could order, or you can call as well if you want to just talk to somebody about what your order might look like. This kind of takes the place of having like wig banks and things like that. Next slide. So Road to Recovery is a program that people have probably heard about. It's been around a very long time. It is where we have volunteer drivers drive patients to treatment. So many patients don't have a ride because either they don't have a car or they don't have family that can take off work to get them to treatment. And when you're going in multiple days a week, it can be really hard to find a ride. So this is one of the ways that we try to support and get patients to treatment. We have Road to Recovery drivers in Flint. We're always looking for more. That is one of the areas that we need them the most. So if anybody's interested in volunteering, it is cancer.org/drive to sign up. You can go to the next slide. I wanted to touch on, I don't think it was in here, I was checking, because during COVID, we weren't able to have Road to Recovery. We supplemented by being able to have transportation grants for our health system. So we had specific funding that we raised at American Cancer Society, and then we were able to provide health systems with a pocket of money that they could use to order Lyft rides, order bus rides, whatever they could do to get their patients to treatment, because during COVID, we didn't want to put immunocompromised patients at risk, but Road to Recovery is back now. And that's really all. I just want to make sure we shared resources. I'm happy to take questions. Feel free to reach out to me as well if you have further questions.
Oh my goodness, Megan, that's amazing. Even the new stuff that's coming out, the app, the resources, huge. I mean, that's wonderful. I see Dr. G, Nurse T have come on. Anything you want to add? We're so grateful for the both of you. Any questions for Megan? Oh, we hear you. We see you.
Hi. Did we touch on the breast cancer walk tomorrow already? We touched on that.
Oh,
So
I
tomorrow,
didn't.
So making strides. We'll be downtown. It starts at, I believe, 9 a.m. The breast cancer 9 a.m. Making strides. It'll be at the flat lot. So it goes until 11:30. I think it's a 3-mile walk, and then they're going to have face painting and other festivities tomorrow downtown at the flat lot. We'll have a table down there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That is such a great way to get involved and to honor our survivors and cheer them on. It's always a really great turnout in Flint, and all the money raised from walks like that help pay for these programs that we have. So the walk is really important. Hopefully it's not too cold for you guys in the morning.
We do have a question. That was a great point. Thank you. Oh, Nurse T, do you have a question?
Oh.
I don't have anything to say. I've been here at Hasselbring with the seniors. We was talking about breast cancer, but we was looking at it from a mental perspective of how it impacts people mentally, as far as their body image. And when women, hear that they have breast cancer, their first thoughts, just addressing our fears. So that's what we're working through this month.
Yeah.
We're just going to talk about and educate it from that perspective. So good job.
Awesome. You guys are always doing amazing stuff there. There was also a question. It just disappeared in the chat. When is the quickest a person could get a ride from Road to Recovery to their treatment?
So it really depends, and I hate that answer, but it depends on if we have volunteer availability. So I type the response to that person with just our phone number. That's what you would call to say, hey, I have somebody who would need a ride. And then hopefully we will have a volunteer available. We don't always. If we don't, the health systems have backup plans. So always reach out to your health system social worker or navigator, and they will look into all options as well.
So I'm going to put that number in the chat. But if you could say it out loud, just so that folks that are listening can get to it.
Yeah, it is 800-227-2345.
$2345. Awesome. Awesome. So it sounds like you need volunteers too to help Road to Recovery. And so how can someone sign up for that?
That is cancer.org/drive.
Okay.
It's a fairly easy process. And I've just, every driver talks about how much they love driving the patients to treatment, and they usually form a really strong bond and become great pals. So, and even if you can only do it twice a month, that's okay. Like, we don't need people who can do it every single day. Just twice a month is the minimum.
Awesome. Huge stuff. So you'll put the link to that, and others. Folks can go to cancer.org as kind of their main landing point for this. Okay. All right. Because I know we've talked about breast cancer, but ACS provides all kinds of other resources. We're just scratching the surface.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot, and all of those programs besides Reach to Recovery are for everybody. But the flyers and stuff were just breast. We have flyers on pretty much everything you could think of.
All right. Okay. So that means, again, we have to have you back and we have to continue this conversation about resources from ACS, screening guidelines, and then resources available in our local community. This has been an amazing, yet again, amazing conversation. So much information from Alex, from Megan. We're so grateful that you could be here. CHWs, community health workers, we got you covered. We always offer the continuing education credits for you for free. Once you exit the Zoom, it will pop up. The Qualtrics survey will pop up. You fill it out, you'll get an email. If you don't, just check your spam junk. That's usually where it winds up. But we've got you covered. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to Blair here with us at WARRE152@msu.edu. All right. And